I'm going to now introduce our two respondents. And what I'm going to ask, I'll introduce them now, and then I'll ask one to speak, and then followed immediately by the other. And then we're going to give Dr. Wiebe a chance to respond to their comments. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A with you all. So that's a really important goal, that we get your interaction in this event. That's very important for all of us, and I think Dr. Wiebe emphasized that at the beginning. So if I can introduce, to begin with, Dr. Ray Vanderzag, who's on your far right. Ray grew up on a farm. He worked for 10 years with an NGO in Haiti, in the area of community development. He worked also for CEDA. Ray has a Master's of Science in Crop and Soil Science. He has a Master's of Arts and a PhD, so he's got a really fabulous background to look at these issues. He is currently a professor of International Development Studies at Canadian Mennonite University at the Shaftesbury campus. His research interests include religion and development, faith-based NGOs, rural development in Haiti, and development assistance policy and programming. Mr. Kenton Loby is in the middle of the group. Kenton is a teacher practitioner. He works at balancing his teaching in international development at Canadian Mennonite University with his international advocacy work in areas addressing structural injustices that surround issues such as hunger, and he looks particularly at issues such as international agricultural trade, the human right to food, and development assistance for small-scale farmers in the global south. Kenton is very active in Winnipeg in this area. He's a board member of USC Canada, founder of the Manitoba Food Charter, and he's a founding member of CMU's Community Garden. So I would like to, could we welcome our two respondents, please?
So this is a tough challenge to sit there and then respond immediately, and it's doubly so because we've just heard a very prophetic and challenging message that's very compelling, and how to engage on that without sounding like the grump. At least that's, well, we talked about this, Kenton. That's why you wanted me to go first, I thought. So the core idea that you were presenting to us was the importance, the necessity of the decommodification of land. And I think you presented a compelling sort of high-level explanation of why that was important. But as prophets are wont to do, they didn't tell us very easily how to get to that promised land. And I guess that's where where my practical farm background kind of stuff wants to ask you questions about. I would love to get there, but I'm not very convinced that we very easily can get there. I thought your quick analogy of sort of abolitionism brought me a glimmer of hope, because there I thought that was a very huge project, and depended on the very changing of the meaning of what it means to be human. And you're sort of arguing in a similar way that we can, over the course of maybe it takes 50 years, maybe it takes 200 years, come to the point of where we change, the fundamentally what land means, and it's not just a commodity, and it's not just that. I resonate with your vision. I'm just wondering, first, I guess is my first point, how to get there in some concrete steps, and clearly what you're doing, and sort of your speaking and your presenting of this, your compelling sort of prophetic vision is part of that. That's what that's how things change, right? Not just necessarily through politics or advocacy, but this is a form of advocacy. It's a form of trying to change the public discourse about that. So that's one point. I guess this is my second point that I'd ask you to address, and this is more of a technical point, and this is based on my experience in Haiti, is that sort of your equation of small-scale peasant agriculture as inherently more ecologically sustainable, my experience in Haiti, and again, we could get into a long technical argument about why that is so, but in Haiti, neglected poor farmers have completely destroyed their rural countryside as well. And you've been in farmers' fields in Haiti where there's nothing much but rocks left because all the land is washed up, the soil is washed off into the sea. And so it's not just scale that matters, it's also the policies and the politics around scale that matters. And so I guess that would be my second challenge to you is you're sort of arguing it's fundamentally about scale, and I would argue that's maybe not necessarily so. It's also the policies that interact with scale. And so it's not just a question of scale, it's also a question of having good policies. And so we could have large-scale farming that is sustainable if there was better policy. And so those are 2 points.
Steal your mic.
Thanks, Nettie. Last night, Nettie visited the class that I'm teaching on just and sustainable food systems and spoke with similar kind of integrity about the kinds of things that we're talking about here on land. She said at one point, food is politics taken internally. And I want to give you a chance to talk a bit further about that, and particularly around maybe what Ray is saying about the policy context. In the prairies now we have, in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, an increasing pressure from investors like those that you were talking about to deregulate and create space. It used to be you only had to be from Saskatchewan in order to own land. It then shifted that you could be Canadian, and there's increasing pressure as folks begin to speculate on the price of land in more volatile stock market times, to open that up as well, saying that this land is in fact devalued and this will actually raise prices significantly. If that's to happen at the provincial level, do you sense that in Saskatchewan there is the political savvy engagement in the coming generations to do that kind of work? Here in Manitoba, it's a question. If we were to engage the province on that kind of work about deregulating in order to get ownership, I wonder, do we have that kind of energy? Are we training our young people to do that? Are we modeling that in our families, like that kind of political engagements? That's one of my questions. Or have we simply become depoliticized as the same process of industrialization has distanced us from all of those things that are going on? The second question that I would have is on this notion of valuing land and beginning to find our place within that land. And just a response on some of the work that's being done on valuing ecosystem services and trying to cost those things that are external to the equations. Is that participating in more of the same, of trying to commodify, air and all of these things? These are big questions, sorry, Nettie, but that's where my brain's going. And then the third is simply around youth and farming. Is money the only barrier for our young people entering farming? Your kids, those kids that I know that are growing up in farms, is it simply the cost and price of land that's distancing them from having more farmers on the land, which I think ought to be our goal? I'm with you. Or is there something else going on in addition to that? And if so, what do you see? I'll stop there.
Thank you. So I've just written down what I heard as the questions, and if I misinterpret the inquiry, then reassert it, okay? Right off the top, I would so not call myself a prophet. I'm struck by how unprophet-like I am. Where is the beard and the robes? And no. But listen, we're all looking ahead. I mean, if we have any hope, it's always in some way framed about what is possible. So in that way, yes. I mean, and the prophets were often grumpy, so maybe you'd make a better prophet than I. I don't know. I don't know. But how do we get there was your first question. Nice to think it, but how do we get there? we got from someplace to here. We know how to journey, and we also know what some of the things that got us here. I mean, we know what the trade agreements were about. We know what the mobility of foodstuffs, the globalization of the food system, the corporatization, the ongoing trade agreements that continue to enforce, reinforce, and aggrandize that agenda. We know what's happening. Those are decisions being made as we speak around negotiating tables. So we know some of that. How did we get here? We got here by feeding holus bolus into that. And how do we get out? We need to change the political picture there. There is no doubt in my mind that political action is part of how do we extricate ourselves from this. But it isn't just actions. It is, and this I hope I was able in some way to express, it's also our worldview, who we think we are in this context. Not just how we do things, but who we think we are here. And on that second, and that's not an adequate response, but that's a beginning of how one might talk about this. And your second piece around, well, peasants are often destructive of their environment also. So what's to be said there? I would never say that all peasant agriculture is ecologically sustainable. A lot of the peasants that I've worked with in the movement in the Via Campesina, a lot of those places, and you can go anywhere in the world, Honduras is one place where it's very obvious, that what used to be peasant agriculture in the good valleys, that land is wall to wall Chiquita bananas, and the peasants are farming up in the very fragile, vulnerable hillsides, and small wonder that this is challenging ecologically. Small wonder. And Haiti has some of that same problem. But that's not to say, so that's by way of explanation, but not justification. I would never say that all small-scale agriculture is sustainable. We still have to be, ecological production is a very complex, and it took in some regions thousands of years, generations upon generations, to understand well enough to do it sustainably. So it's not a quick fix. It's certainly not a quick technical fix. I would say this, though, that's peasant agriculture, small-scale farming is the minimum. There is no context in which disengagement from land, distant monoculture, high-tech, intensive agriculture is, in the long run, sustainable. There is no such context. I would say that unequivocally. And I'm sure there are others here who would want to challenge that. I mean, there are better and worse. There are better and worse, without a doubt. But they all externalize a good deal of their costs ecologically. So I am, if nothing else, I'm not a prophet, but I am a staunch defender of small-scale agriculture, people of the land, peasantry. Okay, now I get to talk politics. Because, and you're right, I quote this, and I didn't make up this bon mot. I quoted it from a fellow named George Featherling. He's a journalist whom I otherwise don't read, but he landed this one in a place where I just thought, this is so profoundly true. He says, all food is politics taken internally. So if you think you can be apolitical, stop eating. You can't be politically neutral and still eat. Okay, is that sort of difficult enough? That's for sure the case. But do we have the energy? You're asking Kenton whether we have the energy to do better. We have an enormous amount of energy for doing better. It is systematically undermined, thwarted, and marginalized. But there is an enormous, in the Farmers Union now, where there's a little bit of space in some places, because some urban people are beginning to ask questions about where their food comes from, and they're beginning to frequent farmers markets and want to know where their food comes from. So that's created a little bit of space for a regeneration of small-scale young farmers. And in the Farmers Union now, we have many of those young, small-scale farmers who are beginning to farm again. So is there energy? Is there enough imagination? Do young people work? Are they prepared to work that hard? In spades. I have no doubt about that. Absolutely no doubt. And are they smarter than we, our generation? Also in spades. I have no doubt about that, really. I mean, there's a lot of energy. It's a question of rethinking who they are. And this takes me to that third question. Can I jump to the third question? Is finances the only barrier? No, it isn't. It's also in an urbanized, industrialized, developed economy, a modern economy. Peasantry and farming, people of the land. Am I doing this? Have been so marginalized that it's just not cool to be on the farm. It's cool to be in town. And when we're culturally, and does this surprise anybody? All of our media, all of our television, all of our newspapers, those are all urban means of communication. And we all out there have our little cell phones, and so we are all inundated with an urbanized culture. So small wonder when somebody graduates from high school, no matter where they graduate, they don't think to themselves, you know, the coolest place wouldn't be Winnipeg. The coolest place would be out there somewhere on the back 40. They would never, in all of their youth, have heard that expressed. And if there's anything that I like to do, it's to express how cool it is out there. Although my kids say I'm culturally irrelevant, but because I'm so not technically sophisticated, but it is very cool. And that's what the young people that are coming back out to the farm are beginning to realize, that it isn't actually just about hard work. It's that. It's not just about being productive. It's that. It's also about being connected. Not just connected in community to other people, but being connected with the earth community. It's a lot of that. It's emotional. It's not just productive. And that's, of course, there's energy for that. That's at the heart of our lives. That's how we function. We are loving beings. Despite being hateful sometimes, that is at heart who we are. So, no, is it cool? It could be so cool. And let me tell you, in a lot of so-called developing economies, it's a hell of a lot cooler than being in a slum somewhere, unemployed. So, you know, I mean, there are options here. Ecosystem valuing, that was your second question. I know, everybody thinks that might be a way of skirting this problem, just making it so that clean air is priced and clean water is better priced, and, you know, wetlands have a price on them. I cringe when I hear that. I know farmers are enthusiastic about it because they're on the line, and economically that looks like that would be another small revenue stream, so on and so forth. But in the whole picture, the more you price and commodify, the more you actually devalue. And the other thing you do is then you put it into a market, and who wins in the market? He who has the bucks, he who has money. No, the whole Rio Plus 20, this is too long an answer, but the whole Rio Plus 20 agenda was around a green economy, which was basically the commodification of those parts of nature which we have not yet managed to pin a price tag on. And for the Via Campesina, for the peasants of the world, that was just such a wrong-headed agenda, because if there's one thing we know as small-scale farmers and peasants, and that's what my maps demonstrated, we never have the big bucks. We never are the top bidder.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray, Kenton, and Nettie. I think if I can ask Ray and Kenton if you want to respond to some of the things that Nettie has said. And as Ray and Kenton are thinking about some further conversation, if I can ask all of you to start thinking about maybe a question that you might have. And we have 2 microphones at the bottom here. If you could maybe start to come down. And the reason why we have them down here is that then we can video you and put you on our website. So if you can start to think about a question and maybe start coming down with your ideas. And I wonder if we could go back to Ray and Kenton. Ray, it sounds like this issue of scale is there's some real interest there between you and Nettie. There's some real lively discussion potential there. And I wondered if you would pick up on, Ray, the policy issue. And I wonder if part of the direction that conversation could go would be to talk about how policies can support the small farms, and Nettie's comment about situations where policies are pushing farmers into more marginal land. Like, you want to just say a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure where to go. Yeah, I'm not sure where to push it. It seems that if you try to, through political policy mechanisms, impose limits on ownership or scale or such, that those can become as, I'm starting to sound really reactionary, but as dangerous as, because if you go back to a step from before, you talked about when we settled here and we came from a period before sort of liberalism was invented, small L liberalism, the freedom of the individual, that the oppression of czars and kings and others was just as bad, and so we settled on sort of a very liberal system of private property and individual liberty and whatnot. I would argue that with limited technology and small-scale technology, that maybe to some extent worked, and that was sort of the golden era of the small family farm. And now it's gotten so different. So how do you set policies around things like scale, or there seems to be the dangers or the difficulties there are just as great as, and I'm not discounting the dangers of runaway capitalism and corporate greed and that kind of stuff. I agree with you; those are very real and very dangerous. I could tell you stories about my brothers in Ontario who they're going to do a quarry north of Toronto, and my brother fought that. So I'm very aware of that, but the alternative to some sort of liberal private system, market-based system, is for me difficult to imagine.
We have lived in the very recent past, in systems of land tenure where there were limits on the marketability of land. In Saskatchewan, it's in 2003, they sort of changed the rules around who could buy land and how much you could buy without living there and farming it. And I don't remember being much freer, feeling much more liberated in 2004 than I did in 2002. So, you see what I mean? We have been in places where we have put specific parameters around the functioning of the market. It's the globalization mindset that somehow undermines our possibility of thinking of anything other than the global marketplace. There are all kinds of marketplaces. I often use the example of when I was a student in Germany, long ago. Anyway, one of the charming things about the German landscape at that time was that village to village, you could go, and there was always a market square in the center of the village. That was how the villages are organized. And that was the marketplace. And if you went on the right day, you were in the market day. That was the marketplace. And hemming the marketplace in were literally institutions of public policy. Always the church, the cathedral, the town offices, the courthouse, very specifically. I mean, for me, it's the image. And you'll notice I like images. It's the image of the marketplace being hemmed in by the socially constructed, politically legitimated institutions of public purpose that hemmed it in. And that's the difference between what we have now. The free trade agreements bulldoze down those institutions, those national and people's institutions, democratic institutions in many instances, eliminated them so that the market could pour all over the village and buy and sell everything. It isn't as if we've never had a place where we had both markets and limits. In fact, for most people, the limits that could be put on the markets would liberate them rather than hem them in. But it would hem in very seriously a very small class of investors. It would limit their freedom very seriously. Those are choices we make. It's a political landscape.
So then the question becomes, how do we change that choice, that we make those better choices, right? And so this is the prophetic task that you've set yourself, I think.
Can I just interject one suggestion? Ray, could you think about the example that Nettie presented in her presentation about her rural municipality experiencing this big growth of foreign investment? Sure. With that case example, can you imagine a practical way that would benefit farm security, farm sovereignty and food security that meets your concerns? I've clearly put you on the spot here.
Yeah,
so I didn't mean to put Ray on the spot.
And to talk to the retiring farmer who benefited from being able to fund a much better retirement now, and then you sort of get on that knife's edge of the problem. How do you protect their right, and at least with the existing law, to sell for the most they can? And so then you either need some sort of a public fund, you need some sort of you need to have had a law from the very beginning so that they would have known that this thing was not possible, and that law changed as well in that case. So I agree, it's very difficult. My cousins in the Netherlands in their farming careers, face very different problems because there are very strong regulations, and they feel hemmed in into what they can do, right? And so, where the government is very activist in protecting a certain type of farming, and with subsidies and the whole mess that is, and so none of those solutions are very easy and tidy to come by. And so I agree that we have to, and I would support you. I'm not that we want to move to a place where we think about land in a different way, and it's not a commodity. But that's the hard part that I'm having, because if anything, our society seems to be going further to the commodifying more and more things rather than commodifying less and less things. And call me really grumpy, but maybe things need to get worse before we sort of click onto that problem.
Did you want to respond, Nettie? I mean, this can continue on if you'd like to.
No, I don't want to make him any grumpier, but it is a question of public policy, and really the limits of how we use our environment. I mean, once we begin to think of our environment as part of our community, then there was all kinds of pushback from slave owners, because that was their commodity, and you had to reimagine an economy that didn't use other people like that. And we have to try and imagine another economy that doesn't use land and ecosystems the way we're using them. And it's not beyond our imagination. It certainly isn't. If it is beyond our imagination, then the future is beyond our reach. A sustainable future is beyond our reach. So it isn't beyond our imagination.
Okay, I see that we have one questioner. Just before we go to our questioner, I just wanted to mention Kenton's point, the question of energy. And I think, for those of you, especially younger people, because I think Nettie picked up on that point, youth today, what is the interest in engaging in farming, right? I think this is a critical question. So maybe, I don't know if some of you would like to kind of pursue that line. I'd be very interested. So the question of, is there energy to build a more sovereign farm system and more food secure? Is there energy? And are young people, and many of you are young and urban-based people, are they a part of that project? So just something if you could think about, and Kenton and Nettie may want to come back on that, but if we could go to our first questioner.
Thanks. I'm Ian Morrow. I'm a new faculty member here at the University of Winnipeg, and I know some of the people on the panel, and great to see you all. The question of, can we get there to a place where land is considered sacred? I would say in certain communities in this country and all over the world, we're already there. And, I spent a lot of time working in the Canadian Arctic in a place called Nunavut. Nunavut in Inuktitut means our land, and people view land very differently in these places. And it's not a matter of can we get there, it's a matter of looking at people that are already there and trying to figure out how in these dominant systems where agriculture is, pervasively taken over the land in the ways that might be seen as unsavory, and potentially destructive, what can we learn from people who've already figured it out and have been doing it for thousands of years? So maybe what are some of your thoughts on shifting from the Western mindset into an indigenous mindset that might help us get there?
Thanks, Ian.
I'll respond very quickly to that, Ian. Did you want to take another question, or can I respond very quickly? In the Via Campesina, we have lots of small-scale peasants, small-scale farmers, etc., but we also have large groups of indigenous peoples. And one of the things that they've taught us in the Via Campesina is that we shouldn't talk about land. We should talk about territory, because it isn't just the soil. It isn't just the land. It's the whole ecosystem. It's everything that lives in that space, that territory. So now in Via Campesina literature, sometimes you see land and territory, because we peasants have been so many generations already sort of imprinted with this view of land. And not necessarily owned land. There's lots of peasants that have communal land. But to broaden that and to achieve enough wisdom to actually see that as a community, as a territory, that is, of course, indigenous points of view in many parts of the world.
Kenton or Ray, any comment, response?
No, Ian, I think that's the right point. I think that's become apparent through the gift of a relationship at the CMU farm. We're a small CSA that operate in the city at the university, an acre of vegetables. And we've begun a relationship with White Earth Land Recovery Project in the States, indigenous community working at seeds and seed sovereignty, and with the Métis community here in Manitoba. That wasn't at our request, though we have lots of theological resources that we don't draw on nearly enough to talk about sacrament and land. But that was something that came from outside through a relationship that remembered the history of relating, 145 years ago when the Métis met the Mennonites at the Red River and helped them move on to the East Reserve. So yes, absolutely. And finding those stories and those places that's happening, I think is crucial. And sharing them and finding places to share.
Next question, please.
As you spoke, a totally new question came to me, which I'll ask, but I want to give a bit of a background to it. As I understand, we live pretty much on the northern edge of sustainable agriculture here in southern Canada. And we're able to produce enormous amounts of food from that by loading it with fertilizers. If my numbers are correct, these days in North America, we're putting about 1 pound of fertilizer per person per day on the land to produce the food that we do. The land is $5,000 an acre. Even at 5% interest, that's $250 that you have to produce each year net to make that work. I don't see that as sustainable. But the question that came to me is, we hear a lot of, or have heard, are hearing about peak oil. There's still lots of oil, but it's costing more and more and to get it out, and we're past the time of cheap oil. When the only way using our present methods of production that we can get massive amounts of food are to pour materials onto the land, have we reached peak food?
So who would like to respond?
That's a very good question. It is the case, and you had a lecturer here at the beginning of the series, Dr. Martin Enns, who spoke a bit about the limitations of the new seed varieties and the new inputs we have, the green revolution, as it was, the chemical revolution, has in some ways already walked into the wall, and we're no longer seeing the kind of increases in production that were earlier foreseen. So in some ways, those technologies look like they've peaked, if you will, the way you're talking. Have we reached peak food? I think that depends very much on how we proceed from here, whether we continue to use what's left of the oil and the soil to extract what we're doing now, or whether we move more and more to an agroecological model where we continue to enhance the environment as we eat from it. We nurture it as it nurtures us, which isn't what this model of farming is. More a model of a mining model than a nurturing model. So if we've reached peak food, maybe in this model, yes, but the earth is very resilient, and if we changed our models of agriculture and land tenure and using the land and using the water, I can't imagine that there can be a lot of rejuvenation.
I think, just to your question too, I think the United Nations Environment Program, after the 2008 food crisis, put out a helpful piece called The Environmental Food Crisis. And looking at, Nettie talked about it, it's not simply food that we're using arable land, good soil for. We're using it for fuel, palm oil, Indonesia, Malaysia, massive amounts of land being used for vehicles. Policies that support that. For fiber, for things that we are wearing, and for feedstocks for animals. That report suggested that just with that amount of the production that we have, you could feed 4.35 billion people on top of what we already have, which is enough. So it's not, I don't think it's a question of scarcity. I really don't. I think that's part of the logic that gets us into the extractive mindset.
And the other piece of it, in terms of is thinking ecologically, is nutrient cycling, and we'd have to replumb our cities, so we don't. The rest of the nutrients that we don't use, we'd have to create a closed ecological system.
There's a policy against that. There is.
Okay.
Well, I have hope that we can change that.
Excellent. Okay, next question, please.
Profit. That's so good.
We're really down into it here.
My name is Megan Clausen-Wiebe, and I come at this from a number of levels. I am presently an agroecology student at the University of Manitoba. I am an aspiring farmer, and I work with the CMU farm in the summers. I am also presently reading La Via Campesina for one of my classes, and so your presentation has been inspiring on multiple of fronts. And so I have just a couple of questions. First, I was wondering, after your work with La Via Campesina, how did your worldview change, and how did your farming change, since you're an organic farmer? And second of all, as an aspiring farmer, what kinds of advice would you have for me?
Well, I'm loath. I have no advice, but when with the first question, how did it change things? that kind of solidarity work made a huge difference in terms of how I personally, but also how the Farmers Union sees its own struggles. That we aren't actually, in terms of people of the land, small-scale farmers, peasants, we aren't actually that different. We have a lot in common. We have hugely diverse languages and cultures and agriculture systems and so on and so forth, hugely diverse, which is as it should be. But that in the social context or political struggles, particularly in confronting the sort of globalization, the constant push, the trade agreements, the WTO, all of that, in the political place, we are actually very much of one mind and in great solidarity. And that gives me enormous hope, because here in Canada, we are anymore such a small, beleaguered, marginal group of people who defend family farming and ecological agriculture, that you feel like it's a lost cause. But when you link arms with the millions elsewhere who also see that the world that they're tending is worth tending and worth defending, then you're among many, and it gives you enormous courage. In terms of the farming piece, get started somewhere, and you're doing that. I mean, get started, and don't let them sort of impose a kind of expensive agenda on you, because that's what real farmers are like. That's one of the big things we battle, and that's why it took us so many years to move from conventional agriculture to organic agriculture on our farm, because the culture of agriculture is agribusiness. And it's a mindset. Everybody around you, from the media to your neighbors, it tells you that actually you gotta farm that way, or else you're not a real farmer. So deal with the identity crisis early on, and then go forward.
Okay, yes, please.
Of course, you're a prophet, Nettie. A prophet is somebody who looks into the future and tells the truth about what they see. So I think you're a prophet. I am interested in the implications of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement that still has not been finalized. I'm part of an advocacy group that's doing a Twitter storm tonight on January the 31st about the dangers of what's in that plan. What are the implications of this trade agreement for peasants around the Pacific Rim, and including Canadian peasants? Can you zero in on that?
I haven't focused on that enough to be able to say anything that you wouldn't already know better than I on that. I mean, we've been in the Via Campesina, we've been focusing on trade agreements as they come up. And there is a group, and you might know this, that 2 days ago there was a huge demonstration in Belgium around the seeds issue that's also part of these agreements, that both in the CETA and the Trans-Pacific. But I don't know the details, clause by clause, to really respond adequately to you. I would have had to study the details clause by clause and to be able to respond, and I haven't done that. I've been in Winnipeg.
Kenton or Ray, any thoughts on that particular agreement?
Well, I think we don't have the text, do we? Like, I think the parts of it have been leaked out.
Just the leaked bits.
Yeah.
And
so
They're scary enough. And the fact that they're not having to be leaked is scary enough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when they tried to do that last time, you got Seattle. This is my question. Like, do we have that kind of momentum? You know, like that, so that when a text doesn't even get released for a trade document like that, that has implications, you know, for half the world or more. That we're, I mean, how's it going? How are the is there energy? Like, that might be my questions to you.
Well, yeah, there's days of actions on the Trans-Pacific Partnership in most major cities across Canada around January the 31st. Some have chosen different days, none on the prairies.
Okay, thank you.
What is happening?
Thank you very much. Robin.
Hey, I'm just going to get back to what kind of Kenton was saying before about, are there other barriers other than just the price of land for young people in farms? And I kind of have some experience in sort of thinking about and dealing with a rural municipality in Manitoba, and thinking about how could you build something that's, you know, suitable for a modern young person who has experienced the life of the city. And I think that there are a lot of barriers, so I'd like to get some of your perspectives on that. First of all, recently I tried to bid on some municipal property in the arm of Strathclair, and was turned down for my bid, and wrote out a long thing about how I'm a young, aspiring person that wants to work on a piece of land and things like that. But I didn't get any response from a single one of the counselors that I sent emails to. And there's just, and my parents' home, RM, as well, there's just a lot of barriers around, this notion that you have to have a quarter section, 800 square foot house with heat recovery ducts, septic field, and everything like that. Well, we just can't afford that, and if we can't, or unless we go into deep amounts of debt, which is not a very freeing thing once you've already been in student debt. So what are municipalities, what's your municipality doing? What could municipalities be doing to open this up a little bit in terms of how land ownership is organized? Can you divide up land? Can you have smaller houses? Can they be made of alternative materials? Things like that are the very practical needs of young farmers that are being blocked by the current kind of rigid system and the lack of enthusiasm in municipalities for change in some cases. So.
Well, you've put your finger on it. It is governance questions. A lot of these regulations, they're governance questions. And the municipal governments are also elected. And there's a real dearth of interest in municipal elections for the most part. I mean, Toronto might not be that way the next time, but elsewhere, you really have to go through some lengths to sort of augment interest in municipal politics, but those are real regulations that can be changed by real people. In Alberta, some years ago, when municipalities started objecting to the location of intensive hog operations in their municipalities, then the provincial government had to take a measure. There was so much power there that the provincial government had to decapitate that. They had to take a measure to say that is no longer within the purview of a municipality, because municipalities wouldn't have to misuse that power. They could actually be progressive about being invitational and allowing for alternate ways of farming and living there. That is municipal regulation, and that's pretty local. In that municipality where I live, the municipal secretary seemed kind of sad when we'd started talking about this, but that's all. There was no mention that this is somehow perverse, this land grab going on. And the municipality south, where all the tree lines have been bulldozed down, miles of them. Coffee Row, apparently, I don't drink coffee there, but Coffee Row apparently is unhappy because they saw that as part of their community good, that they had all these, and the beauty of their own landscape, this was what that was like, but they didn't actually think that they had any right to speak out against the private landowner. So it tells you how deep-seated those fears around, and I think you named that before, those fears around any kind of challenge to this view of viewing property and authority and progress is. But it has to change.
Kenton or Ray, any more further thoughts? Small, starting up a farm, what does it take?
I think, on Saturday we gathered at Young United, and how many folks were out? 60, 70 people out for a discussion on at least one of the parts of what you're asking on regulations and the regulatory context within Manitoba agriculture for small-scale producers. This is following a seizure of cured meats from a small integrated livestock farm in southwest Manitoba. There's work. There's no end to that work, and I think that's where I think Nettie embodies some of the kinds of crazy patience that's required in order to continue to engage this. I say that with affection. I mean, because you've been at this.
I just heard the crazy part.
No, but the not stepping back. I mean, you drew solidarity and strength from others, but to not simply step back from those engagements in the fray, as you were, but to build solidarity, to begin doing that work of networking at the grassroots level, and to continue to push. That's my worry, is whether we've got that, or whether some of these other things that we've talked about have bred a kind of impatience in us, a kind of speed, which is also a product of globalization, that when we get to those edges and those engagements, that we're easily pushed back from them.
Ray?
I'm going to give two quick answers. The first one is just intended for comic relief. One of the solutions is to start dating a farmer's daughter, and there's a chance there. That's the silly answer. The other one, though, is a little bit more serious. Is to agree to become a mentee of a farmer who is sympathetic to your point of view, who is willing to rent you at whatever price a piece of land while you start working in a corner where and you start to get your feet wet, and so I think there are farmers. Kenton is an example in the city of mentoring students now in the CMU farm, but I think that can happen in the countryside as well, where you have to identify farmers. Nettie, there's an opportunity for your grandkids or adopted grandkids, right, to mentor. I don't know. That's I'm not being facetious on that.
Thank you. Question over here. Next person, please.
She said you just answered her question, so I'm going to go now. I wanted to take you back to the beginning of your talk, where you talked about being disconnected from our histories, the different disconnections, and especially the fact that you talked about the settlers that came here, the disconnection that happened. You mentioned a book by Savage. But I think in some ways, in the work that I do, I'm a geography. I work with a sense of place, and I plan to continue working. I thought maybe we could talk about that. But I'm starting a PhD to work more on sense of place and geography, which I'm thrilled about. But I wonder if it has to do with our lack of connection to our history. I'm a European, Canadian, American, adopted Canadian actually, but my family was Mennonite. They came over severely disconnected from their home, which is not on this continent, which is on another continent, and European history, which comes out of disconnection and dichotomy between what is knowledge and what isn't knowledge, science and folklore, and the severe disconnection from place that we have experienced generationally. And that through globalization we forget, and we forget to teach that, and we continue to use language. You mentioned that by language we see what we value, and I think and I don't mean to pick on you because I really appreciated your talk, but you speak about urban and rural as being separate, and people have now moved urban and rural. Also, I think that in our culture we often have all these voices over and over again to telling us, if you do this, then you will have this. And our world is in crisis, so if you farm more, move back to the farm, move out of the city. If you do all these things, then you will be connected and healthy. And I think that is overwhelming. It was overwhelming for me as an international development student, and I think it's overwhelming for people, and then they get stuck. And I think that it goes back for me to that dichotomy of urban-rural. And I'm just going to end by saying that one thing that always inspires me is skateboarding. skateboarding, urban skateboarders. Are there any skateboarders here by any chance? Yay! All right. I recently discovered how cool skateboarding is in a geography way because skateboarders connect with their urban geography and they challenge it, they contest it, and they are put down. They are stopped, there are signs, there are ways that they are not allowed to make art. Same with graffiti. It's a way of using our urban geography. It's so dynamic. And I know a skateboarder who continues to find ways to skateboard, who a few years ago, 3 years ago, moved out onto the land. And this is a young man who contested his urban geography and was very connected. And he decided to move out onto the land with a partner in a semi-trailer truck, and they have a baby just recently. And I think, oh my gosh, he wants to continue skateboarding out in this piece of land where there's right now nothing except for a semi-trailer that they've converted into a place. And I think if that is an imagination of a radical revisioning of connection, then that to me is hopeful. This urban and rural together, combined.
Thank you very much. And any responses from our panel? Very interesting comments. Yes, please, another question.
Yeah, basically, coming from a rural background myself, I grew up farming, and I watched as a lot of things have changed. One of the things that I see as a major change to small farmers, which I agree is one of the best ways to go, is small farms, more focused. But one of the things that I feel that has really changed the aspect of that is organizations like the Canadian Wheat Board. How do you feel about organizations like that which try to help the smaller farmer being pushed out by larger farmers who want to focus on their own personal profit?
I feel this is an invitation to speak. No. Listen, we're not going to do the wheat board debate, but we've done lots of the wheat board debates. Yeah, no, I feel very strongly about that. That's a classic example of how you, with a stroke of a policy pen, you unravel both the history and the collectivity and the advantage, the equalization of opportunity, which is what the Wheat Board did. As well as, it turns out, you also trash the transportation system to some extent, but you do that in passing. But no, for sure, those kinds of institutions, those kinds of cooperatives that were built, and I said earlier, I think I said something about people came to these places that were hard for them to start in, and they understood something about what it would take, and minimally, they understood that it would take human community, co-ops, Manitoba Pool Elevators, Saskweed Pool, co-ops everywhere. Every community had a co-op or 3 or 5. They understood that. Mennonites understood that around pig butchering and barn raising. And I mean, we understood that our connection, our survival, our possibility depended on taking care of that community. And insofar as we unravel that, the locks on the fences for me are sort of symbolic of that. We are endangered. Yes. Without a doubt. That was not the Canadian Wheat Board speech.
Kenton or Ray, any thoughts about the Wheat Board?
I'm not going there.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment. I think we have one more question. Last chance. If anyone else has a question, we just have a couple minutes left, so please come on up. Yes.
What a pleasure this evening has been. I just wanted to maybe get clarification, Nettie, from in terms of the way that you've been using tonight the word peasant, often interchanging or alongside of smallholder or family farmer. So first, if you could just clarify a definition for that for me, and secondly, for our North American ears, I think the word peasant has a lot of preconceived ideas of not us So my question would be, are there any of us peasants in North America?
Me? Yeah. No, that's a wonderful question. I should just give a little background there. We in North America and parts of Europe, certainly English speakers, we talk about farming. And that whole language of being a farmer rather than a peasant is already an industrialization of language. When I began in the Via Campesina, I said carefully what you just start to say here. We don't think of ourselves as peasants. We really can't use that language. We're farmers. Because peasant in English is kind of an insult, which tells you something too about how progress and modernization and industrialization is taking yourself out of the land. Because peasant in its base meaning means people of the land. That's what peasant means. And for us to be people of the land is surely a sign of integration and should be a badge of pleasure and pride and not a sign of marginalization and insult. So we need to take back that language, and we're in the process of doing that. We're taking back that language and reintegrating the value of people of the land. Here's how that works. If you marginalize or devalue the land, first of all, if you devalue food, cheap food, you begin to devalue the places it comes from, the animals and so on and so forth. And it's not a very long step to start to find that the people who produce it are kind of marginal too. So it's in our interest as ecologists, as citizens, as caring people, to take that language back and to call ourselves people of the land, peasants, and to say that as a way of resisting that other formulation of what we do and who we are. So yes, I stand by that. I'm a peasant.
Yes, please.
I was very stunned by your image of the lock on the gate, and I'm aware that in Saskatchewan, with the federal government disposal of the PFRAs, that common land, there has actually been, it seems to me that there's been a strong movement, both urban and rural. A voice has been raised. Many voices have been raised. Do you? I guess what concerns me is my own self as an urban person from Yehai, who's become increasingly conscious of these issues and questions and concerns, but who feels very helpless about how to make those reconnections with the farmers who produce the food that I eat. Where do you see the energy arising in urban people who don't know the way out there to take advantage of the energy and the will that is there? Where are the signs of hope, the direction posts for us? If it's not PFRAs, there must be other places.
PFRA is actually a good example because that was one of those moments, and we have more and more of those politically now, where small-scale farmers, ecologically minded farmers, are joining hands with environmentalists who are mostly urban. I mean, most of the environmental movement has been an urban movement, and are joining hands and seeing that we have common interests and we work in solidarity. So that's actually a good example, and there are many others. Earlier, just before I came to Winnipeg, I spoke to the Nature Society, and they're all urban people, and they're people who are, a lot of them, bird watchers and so on and so forth, and they're seminally interested in maintaining a rural environment where birds, songbirds and other birds flourish. And you can only do that when all the other parts of the ecosystem are healthy too. So I felt like I was among my own, although I was the farmer and they were urban bird watchers. So there are lots of places of confluence, and the best place is lunch.
Okay, another question. And I think I see maybe, is it 2 more people? So maybe we'll finish with these 3 questions then.
Sorry, I'll try to be quick. So it caught me when you were talking about changing the language, and I used to watch The Urban Peasant every day after school. That was one of my favorite shows. And
what's the show?
The Urban Peasant. It was this guy who would go out into the market and get food and cook it up. Anyways, so you talked about having a connection with the land, and I'm doing some work with the sustainability department here at the university, and we're looking for ways to engage student population in sustainable activities and in food especially. And you've talked a lot about sort of the rural aspects, and in some ways you may have answered this question already, but how do you engage people in an urban environment with the land? Like how does an urban dweller get that sense of land?
That's a wonderful opening. And we should have talked more about that, about the urban landscape. I mean, Kenton does some of that, and all across this country now, there are groups of young people mostly who are doing community gardens and who are doing projects, all kinds of food projects, gathering fruit and so on and so forth. There was a time when I, as your standardized, monoculture of the mind kind of person, sort of thought urban agriculture was an oxymoron, an internal contradiction, like military intelligence. Anyway, that's the pacifist in me speaking. But I thought it was just not a possibility. But it's more than a possibility. There are cities, and I'm thinking of Havana, that are almost food self-sufficient because people can grow food in urban areas. In fact, in lots of ways, I envy the urban gardeners because they have often a plentiful supply of good water, whereas I'm out there struggling with dryland gardening, and I can't believe that we have all of these little patches of inane chemical-absorbing lawns in front of all these houses. Who invented that absurdity? Where nobody ever sits, they take a lot of care, they use land, and have good water supplies? The farmer in me just is appalled by that, because all of that could be urban garden, and it would be so much more beautiful. So thanks for raising that.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, please.
Hello, my name's Camila, and I want to resonate with the woman who said overwhelming. I'm a mum-to-be, and I have a graduate degree in communication, and have always tried to push my family into eating certain ways, and I get a lot of rolled eyes. Communication, especially for 98% of us, for the 2% of Canadians who are the farmers. I do not have a green thumb at all. I compost, and I try to put my money where my mouth is. But when you're paying $5 for an apple, that's organic, and then you realize that company wasn't really labeled organic anyway. I guess for me, now that I've gone into my 30s, ideology and isn't enough for me anymore, and I do want to take action, and I don't know where to go. And I read, and the news only seems to be more apocalyptic than ever, and everything that Canada has done environmentally seems to be starting to be undone, and the commodification of the Arctic, and yay, the Northwest Passage is opening and we can do more trade. If I were to walk away today with 3 action items that you would like me to walk away with today, where do we go? As a young person with education, with some money, it really seems you can read the websites, you can join the groups, but what else where can we do? That's what I want. 3 bullet points of what can I do today? Please.
I'll help you out. Join the Harvest Moon Local Food Initiative. saving seeds. You don't have to be a green thumb to save seeds, and we can come to the CMU farm and learn how to do it. You're most welcome. And find a grandparent or somebody who can help you learn to can so that you're not dependent on food that you don't know where it came from and whether or not it's organic. Join Fruit Share and find a neighbor's tree. That's a program here in Winnipeg that allows anybody who's got a tree that lets all the fruit fall and get wasted to connect to someone who's got it. And then figure out how to preserve it. Get a little chest freezer. If you're going to have a baby,
That's 6 points.
Sorry.
With just 2 minutes left, I'd like to go to our final speaker, but thanks, Kenneth.
My name is Nettie from CMU. I'm a biblical theology studies and ideas student. Yesterday, you told us in class that the world population will be probably 9.5 billion in 2050. And as a champion of small-scale farming, I'm beginning to wonder in my mind how small-scale farming can sustain us in 2050 as without the complement or without the support of mechanized farming.
The question is, as the population grows, can we rely on small-scale farming to actually be able to do the job of feeding people?
Exactly.
Actually, small-scale integrated ecological farming is more productive of food than large-scale intensive farming. So just on production methods, yes. Definitely, without a doubt. And the science is becoming clearer and clearer on that. The fly in the ointment often is, but small-scale farmers, when you're locally, if you had food sovereignty and you were actually locally self-sufficient, what if a drought hits? Or the weather turns, or a disease of some sort. For the disease, they're much more resilient because we don't have this massive uniform production, so we're not nearly as vulnerable to disease destroying crops or animals. But there are, of course, weather and local disasters. And nobody imagines that we would have a world that would suddenly shrink into tiny, disconnected places again. We haven't had that world so far as humankind can remember. There has always been relationships across territories and traveling and so on and so forth. So the possibility of, emergency aid still exists. It's turning it on its head, and instead of imagining that the large-scale, high-intensive agriculture is going to do the staple production of food around the world, and the rest will be niche markets and marginal. It's turning it on its head and saying, no, the staple foods, the people's daily diets will be in fact produced in the regions where they are appropriately produced, and the food cultures and histories make that the appropriate food, and you only trade in what is necessary or in an emergency. And it would put the whole emphasis in a completely different, it would turn the system upside down. But the ideology has to be turned upside down too.
Thank you very much. I think, excuse me, for the purposes of time, we should end the session now. And I would like to thank Nettie and Kenton and Ray for their presentations. And just before you leave, I'd like to plug the fact that our next presentation is in just about 1 month, February 27th, which is another Thursday evening. Our speaker is Dr. Eric Holt Jimenez from Food First. Many of you may recognize Food First. It's one of the sort of a pioneer organization looking at food sovereignty issues. He'll be speaking, and so please come back then. I also wanted to mention we have a series of courses at Menno Simons College in international development and conflict resolution, including this course or these courses on food security and farm sovereignty. We have 2 of them at Menno Simons, and there's 1 at the Shaftesbury campus of Canadian Mennonite University. So if you're interested to find out about those, please come and talk with me or one of the faculty members. And finally, you're welcome to join us for refreshments up in the lobby there. And yeah, just thank you so much for coming. It's been a great session.